Your mission is to hit the subscribe button, so you won't miss a single action-packed declassified file audiobook. Your mission begins in 3, 2, 1. Cuban Crossfire. Key West felt like the end of the line, which suited me just fine. After the Miami firestorm, Rico Alvarez silenced, the trafficking hub crippled, an innocent woman hopefully safe under Isabel Moreau's discreet protection, I'd eased the Sea Witch south, island hopping down the Keys chain, finally fetching up in a transient slip at the Key West Bight Marina. It was noisy, crowded with tourists chasing Hemingway's ghost and boat bums chasing their next beer, but the anonymity felt blessedly different from the watchful paranoia of Miami. Here, among the sunburned anglers and the margarita-fueled crowds, maybe Jack Kincaid could actually disappear for a while. I spent the days fishing out past the reef, letting the sun and salt scour away the grime of the last few months. The physical work helped. The solitude almost felt like peace. Almost. But the nights were long, filled with the hum of the generator, the gentle rock of the boat, and the swirling ghosts of Panama, Costa Rica, Miami. The data card, locked away, still pulsed with unanswered questions, the Ouroboros symbol, the biotech hints, the Vance-Croft connection. Sleeping didn't come easy. Every unfamiliar engine noise in the night, every shadow moving on the dock, brought me instantly awake, hand reaching for the pistol I kept tucked under the mattress. The encrypted call from Sully came on a Tuesday morning, the sky cloudless, the water shimmering under a deceptively benign sun. I was topside, tinkering with a sticking fuel injector, hands greasy, mind blessedly focused on the simple mechanics. The sat phone's specific chirp, Sully's emergency high-priority signal, sent a familiar jolt of apprehension down my spine. I took the call below deck, running security protocols first. "What is it, Sully?" I kept my voice low. "Got a delicate one, Jack." His voice, digitally masked as always, crackled through the speaker. "Walk in." Or rather, a very careful indirect approach through channels I monitor. Cuban national. Claims legitimate dissident credentials, high-level contacts inside the island. Needs to meet you. Urgently. Cuba. 90 miles away, a world away. Felt too close. Dissidents usually talk to Langley or State Sully, not guys like me with active warrants. Says official channels are compromised or too slow. Says he needs someone specific. Someone with your unique skill set and history. He mentioned a name, Jack. Said you'd understand the significance. A pause. Marcus Thorne. The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers, clattering onto the cabin sole. Marcus Thorne. A name I hadn't heard spoken aloud in 15 years. A name synonymous with brilliant tradecraft, ruthless pragmatism, and the bitterest betrayal of my early career. My mentor. The man who taught me how to read the shadows, how to manipulate, how to survive, and then used those lessons to try and burn me, sacrificing me for his own ambitions within the agency before he finally went too far and disappeared entirely, presumed dead or deeply buried by the powers that be. Thorne. My voice sounded rusty. Thorne's dead. Or locked away in some black site. Apparently not, Sully said grimly. According to this guy, calls himself Arturo Fuentes, Thorne is very much alive. Set up shop in Cuba, operating completely off the grid, outside anyone's control. Doing what? A cold dread started to spread through me. Marcus Thorne operating freely with his intellect and lack of scruples, that was a terrifying thought. Fuentes claims Thorne is orchestrating something big, dangerous. Playing factions off against each other. Cuban hardliners, maybe elements within their intelligence services, possibly involving rogue American assets or exile groups. Fuentes used the phrase, catastrophic destabilization. Says it targets both U.S. and Cuban interests, designed to benefit only Thorne himself or whoever he serves now. Whoever he serves now. The Ouroboros symbol flashed in my mind. Could Thorne be connected to that wider conspiracy? Why me, Sully? After all this time? Fuentes says Thorne is playing a complex game, full of misdirection, psychological traps. He believes only someone who knows Thorne intimately, knows how his mind works, someone he trained. Only you have a chance of anticipating him, getting close enough to stop him before it ignites. He says Thorne respects, or at least remembers, your abilities. Respect. Thorne respected leverage, weaknesses, opportunities. If he remembered me, it was likely as a loose end, or a piece he could still manipulate on the board. This Fuentes sounds like he could be Thorne's own cutout, Sully. A lure. Sending me into a trap. After my anonymous client in Costa Rica, my trust meter was buried deep in the negative. Thought of that, Sully admitted. Ran every check I could. Fuentes' dissident bona fides seem legitimate, according to chatter from reliable sources inside the island network. He's taken huge risks contacting us. He sounds genuinely desperate. Says time is running out. Where does he want to meet? Key West. Café Almonte. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Use the recognition phrase, is the Malecon crowded today? He'll respond appropriately. Sully hesitated. Jack. Thorne taught you. He also tried to destroy you. Going anywhere near him. That's walking into the fire. Tell Fuentes I'll be there, I said, my voice flat. My hand rested on the cool metal of the data card in my pocket. Thorne alive. Operating in Cuba. Potentially connected to the Vance Croft network. It felt like the tumblers of some vast, complex lock were finally clicking into place, revealing a pattern I couldn't ignore, however much I wanted to. The past wasn't just haunting me. It was reaching out, pulling me back into the game. Café Almonte was a small slice of Havana tucked away on a quiet side street off Duval, smelling strongly of roasting coffee and frying plantains. Tourists mostly walked past, heading for the bigger bars. I took a small table outside, under a slowly rotating ceiling fan, ordered a cortadito, and watched the sleepy street. At precisely 10, a man approached my table. Older, maybe late 60s, thin, with tired eyes behind thick glasses, wearing a slightly rumpled white Guayabera shirt. He looked more like a retired university professor than a high-level dissident risking his life. He carried a worn leather satchel. Is the Malecon crowded today? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. His tired eyes met mine, sharp, intelligent, assessing. Only with ghosts, senor, he replied, the accent cultured Cuban Spanish. May I? He gestured to the empty chair. I nodded. He sat down, placing the satchel carefully on his lap. You are the one they call Kincaid? He asked quietly. I answer to it sometimes. You're Fuentes? Arturo Fuentes, at your service, such as it is. He took a deep breath. Thank you for meeting me. It was difficult to arrange. My contact said you wanted to talk about Marcus Thorne. Just saying the name felt like tasting ash. Fuentes nodded grimly. He is alive, Senor Kincaid. Operating from Cuba. For months now, my network has gathered whispers, fragments. Thorne has established connections deep within certain factions of our government, intelligence services, even the military hardliners. He uses the name El Arquitecto, the architect. He is planning something. What? We don't know the specifics, Fuentes admitted, frustration clear in his voice. That is the problem. Thorne operates through layers of cutouts, misinformation. But we know the goal, chaos. An event, an incident designed to shatter the fragile rapprochement between Cuba and the United States, perhaps trigger a new crisis, a conflict. To what end? Who benefits? Thorne himself, we believe, Fuentes leaned forward, lowering his voice further. Or the shadowy international organization he now appears to represent. Their symbol, he sketched quickly on a napkin, sliding it across the table. My breath hitched. The Ouroboros. The serpent eating its tail, the electronic node at its heart. The same symbol Sully had found buried in Vance's files. It was connected. Thorne works for them? I asked, my mind reeling. Or with them? He seems to have access to incredible resources, technology far beyond anything Cuba possesses. He moves freely, protected at the highest levels. He is building something, manipulating people, playing a game only he understands. And Fuentes met my eyes again. He has mentioned you. Me? Indirectly. References to a promising protege, a past disappointment, someone whose skills he respects. My network believes he anticipates you. Perhaps he even wants you to come after him. A final test. A settling of old scores. Fuentes shook his head. With Thorne, it is always layers within layers. Which is why we need you. You were his student. You know how he thinks, how he operates. You may be the only one who can see through his deceptions before it is too late. He opened his satchel, took out a slim folder. This contains everything we have. Evidence of Thorne's presence, suspected locations, known associates within Cuba, our analysis of the potential threat vectors. It includes credentials, contacts within Havana who can provide limited, extremely discreet assistance. He pushed the folder towards me. Please, Senor Kincaid. Help us. Help Cuba. Help prevent a catastrophe that Thorne seems determined to unleash. I stared at the folder, then at Fuentes' earnest, desperate face. 15 years. 15 years since Thorne's betrayal ripped my career and my trust apart. Now he was back, operating 90 miles from my doorstep, tangled up in the same Ouroboros conspiracy that linked Vance and Croft. It wasn't just the past reaching out. It was the present converging into an unavoidable confrontation. Sully was right. This was walking into the fire. But maybe, just maybe, it was the only way to finally get some answers and stop Marcus Thorne before he burned everything down. Chapter 2. The folder Arturo Fuentes had given me felt heavy as lead ballast in my hands. Back in the relative sanctuary of the Sea Witch's cabin, moored under the deceptively cheerful Key West sun, I spread the contents out on the small chart table. Grainy surveillance photos that might, possibly, show a figure resembling an older Marcus Thorne entering nondescript buildings in Havana. Intercepted communication fragments, heavily coded, hinting at coordination between disparate groups, hardline military factions, shadowy offshore entities. Lists of names, Cuban officials, foreign businessmen, known exiles, some marked with question marks, others with cryptic annotations. And the Ouroboros symbol, appearing sporadically like a watermark on encrypted digital intercepts Fuentes' network had somehow snagged. It wasn't proof positive, not the kind that would stand up in any court, but it painted a picture murky and menacing enough to align with everything I knew about Thorne, and everything I was beginning to suspect about the global reach of the Vance-Croft conspiracy. Thorne, alive, operating 90 miles away, pulling strings connected to the same network that had used me, framed me, nearly killed me multiple times over. Coincidence wasn't in Thorne's vocabulary. Going to Cuba was insane. A fugitive American with my history, operating without backup in a tightly controlled state, hunting a legendary ghost from the intelligence world. Suicide looked like better odds. But walking away felt impossible now. Thorne was a loose end from my own past, a debt unpaid. And if he was tied to Ouroboros, then ignoring him meant ignoring the larger threat that seemed to cast its shadow over everything. Preparations were grimly simple. I secured the Sea Witch, arranging long-term dockage under one of my cleaner aliases, hoping she wouldn't attract undue attention. Transferred most of my remaining funds into untraceable digital currencies Sully could help me access remotely. Packed light, minimal gear, weapons broken down and concealed, the data card from Panama, and the new set of credentials Fuentes provided, David Miller, Canadian academic researching pre-revolutionary architecture. Thin, but maybe enough for initial entry. I sent Sully one brief coded burst, heading south. 90 miles. Old ghosts. Monitor Ouroboros chatter, Thorne specifically. Stay dark. Fuentes' network handled the transport. No flights, no official channels. Instead, instructions led me late one night to a dilapidated fish house on Stock Island. Waiting there, tied up amongst battered shrimpers and crab boats, was a rusting 30-foot fishing vessel, the Libertad, smelling powerfully of diesel and decaying bait. The captain, a taciturn man named Carlos with eyes that had seen too much, simply nodded when I gave the passphrase Fuentes had provided. Two other crew members, equally silent, cast off the lines without a word. We chugged out into the Florida Straits under a moonless sky, the lights of Key West shrinking behind us, the vast darkness of the sea opening up ahead. The crossing took most of the night, the small boat pitching uncomfortably in the steady swell, the thrum of the old diesel engine a monotonous backdrop. There was nothing to do but watch the phosphorescent wake, feel the salt spray, and let the memories surface unbidden, unwelcome. Marcus Thorne. He'd been more than a mentor. He'd been the architect of my early career, the brilliant, demanding puppeteer who saw potential in a raw, cynical recruit and honed it into a razor's edge. He taught me tradecraft not from dusty manuals, but through brutal, real-world simulations. Taught me to read people, anticipate threats, blend into any environment. Taught me that information was power, and sentiment was weakness. Emotion is friction, Kincaid. I could still hear his voice, calm and persuasive. It slows you down, makes you predictable. Operate clean. He was charming, witty, could quote obscure poetry one minute, and dissect geopolitical strategy the next. He saw connections others missed, played angles nobody else dared. I admired him, feared him, trusted him implicitly. Until the Budapest operation. A supposedly simple intel handover, gone disastrously wrong. Ambush, explosions, dead agents, good agents. And me, left holding the bag, hung out to dry. Internal investigations, pointing fingers facilitated by Thorne's own carefully placed misinformation. He'd climbed the next rung of the agency ladder over the wreckage of my career, sacrificing his protégé without blinking. Operate clean. The ultimate betrayal, delivered with cold efficiency. Later, I heard whispers he'd finally overplayed his hand, tangled with forces even he couldn't control, and vanished, officially listed as retired, and officially presumed neutralized or buried so deep he'd never surface. Until now. Cuba. Working with Ouroboros. It made a sick kind of sense. Thorne always chafed under agency restrictions, always believed he saw the bigger picture, that the ends justified any means. A group like Ouroboros, with its global reach, advanced tech, and apparent disregard for national boundaries or conventional morality, it would appeal to his arrogance, his desire to reshape the world according to his own grand design. El Arquitecto. The Architect. A perfect alias for a man who saw people and nations as mere building blocks. The first hint of dawn found us approaching the Cuban coast. Not Havana's iconic skyline, but a low mangrove-fringed shoreline miles west of the city. Carlos cut the engine, letting the Libertad drift towards a hidden inlet. A smaller skiff, showing no lights, emerged from the mangroves to meet us. More silent men, these ones younger, eyes watchful, armed with discreet bulges under loose shirts. They transferred me and my single bag quickly, efficiently. Carlos just nodded, already turning the Libertad back towards the open sea, another transaction completed, no questions asked. The skiff navigated winding channels through the mangroves, finally reaching a muddy landing where an ancient battered Lada Niva waited. The drive into Havana was a jarring immersion into a different world. Crumbling colonial architecture stood beside stark Soviet-era blocks. Vintage American cars, gleaming like museum pieces or held together with wire and hope, shared the road with sputtering motorcycles and overloaded bicycles. The air smelled of sea salt, diesel exhaust, frying food, and damp earth. Propaganda billboards competed with vibrant street art. There was music everywhere, but also a palpable sense of watchful stillness, of things unsaid hovering just beneath the surface. Fuentes' contact, a nervous young man named Miguel who introduced himself as a history student, drove me to a small apartment in Vedado, a once grand neighborhood now faded but still retaining a certain atmospheric charm. The apartment was on the top floor of a appealing Art Deco building, sparsely furnished but clean, with a balcony overlooking a leafy street. "This is safe," Miguel assured me, handing over a local burner phone and a set of keys. Fuentes arranged it. Low profile. The number in the phone is for emergencies only, connects to our network contact. Use public phones for anything else. Be careful, Senor Miller. He used my alias. Havana watches. Especially now. Especially strangers asking questions. He seemed eager to leave. Alone in the apartment, the sounds of Havana drifting up from the street, vendors calling, music playing, old cars rumbling past. I stood on the balcony, looking out at the city bathed in the softening late afternoon light. Somewhere in this sprawling, complex city, Marcus Thorne was pulling strings, playing his deadly game. El Arquitecto. The ghost from my past was real, and he was waiting. The sense of foreboding was a physical weight, heavier than the humid Caribbean air. The game was afoot, whether I wanted it or not, played on his home turf this time. And Thorne never liked to lose. Chapter 3. Havana pulsed with a rhythm entirely its own, a captivating, frustrating mix of vibrant life and slow decay. Days settled into a cautious routine. I explored the city on foot, as David Miller, the Canadian academic, ostensibly researching the evolution of Cuban architecture from colonial grandeur to revolutionary pragmatism. Vedado, with its fading mansions and leafy streets, Habana Vieja, a stunning crumbling museum piece thronging with tourists and hustlers, Centro Habana, noisy, crowded, intensely alive. I carried a sketchbook, took photos with a cheap digital camera, looked like just another slightly bewildered academic trying to make sense of it all. Inside, every nerve was humming, scanning faces, watching reflections in shop windows, listening to the cadence of conversations drifting from open doorways. Surveillance here wasn't just electronic. It felt woven into the social fabric, a city accustomed to watching and being watched. My academic cover needed refinement if I was going to get anywhere near Thorne, or El Arquitecto, as Fuentes' network called him. Researching crumbling facades wouldn't cut it. I shifted Miller's focus. Now he was fascinated by modern Cuban projects, particularly state-funded secure facilities, seeking to understand how revolutionary ideals translated into contemporary defensive or clandestine architecture. It was thin, academic jargon mostly, but it gave me a pretext to ask questions that might brush against the edges of Thorne's hidden world. Fuentes' folder contained a short list of potential contacts, none guaranteed, all carrying significant risk. I started with the least overtly dangerous, a librarian named Sofia, working deep within the archives of the Biblioteca Nacional, Jose Marti. Miguel, the nervous student who'd met me initially, facilitated the introduction with a coded reference. Sofia was older, sharp-eyed, with an air of profound disillusionment hidden behind professional politeness. We met among dusty stacks of periodicals. "Senor Miller," she greeted me quietly, not making eye contact for more than a second. "Miguel said you were interested in construction records. Post-revolutionary period? Specifically, state-funded projects from the late Cold War era onwards," I elaborated, keeping my voice low. "Secure installations, communications bunkers, command centers. My research compares design philosophies." I slid a list across the table, mostly legitimate known Cold War sites, but with one addition: the vague designation for the restricted military zone west of Havana that Fuentes' intel suggested might be Thorne's base. And any unusual large-scale projects funded more recently, perhaps under non-standard budget lines. Sophia scanned the list, her expression carefully blank. When she got to the restricted zone designation, her eyebrow flickered almost imperceptibly. Accessing records for active military zones is problematic, she stated flatly. Requires highest-level clearance. And recent project budgets are often classified state security priority. Of course, I said, playing the naive academic. But perhaps in classified manifests. Supply logs for construction materials delivered to those zones. Geological survey reports from the areas prior to development? Sometimes, I added conspiratorially, the mundane details reveal more than the official blueprints. She considered this, tapping a long finger on the worn library table. Perhaps, she conceded after a long silence. Such records, if they exist and weren't purged, would be deep in the ministry archives. Difficult. Time-consuming. She finally met my eyes. And potentially unhealthy to inquire about. My university provides hazard pay for archival dust inhalation. I attempted a weak smile. She didn't return it. Leave it with me, Senor Miller, she said quietly. Check back in 2 days. Same time. She turned and disappeared back into the labyrinth of shelves, leaving me with the distinct feeling I'd just handed her a lit stick of dynamite. My next contact was Raoul, a mid-level functionary in the Ministry of Construction, introduced via another coded message as someone sympathetic to historical preservation, Fuentes' euphemism for disgruntled and possibly bribable. We met in Capalia Park, amidst families eating ice cream and teenagers flirting. Raoul was sweating despite the shade, constantly dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. El Arquitecto, Raoul breathed, after I carefully steered the conversation towards rumors of influential foreign advisors involved in unusual projects. His eyes darted around. See, people whisper the name. A phantom. Powerful connections reaching very high. Military, intelligence, even certain party officials. He lowered his voice. They say he directs projects outside the normal channels. Funding appears from nowhere, classified budgets allocated to initiatives with no clear purpose. What kind of projects? Who knows? Advanced communications networks, they say. Secure facilities. There was talk, he leaned closer, his voice barely audible, about massive excavation work starting last year at the old Cayo Libertad facility. West of the city. Supposedly decommissioned Soviet missile base. Officially, it's environmental remediation. Unofficially. He shrugged, sweating profusely now. They say El Arquitecto needed space. Deep space. Underground. An underground bunker. At the old Soviet base. Matching the restricted zone Sophia was looking into. The pieces clicked. Thorne wasn't just hiding. He was dug in, literally, operating from a secure subterranean facility with high-level Cuban complicity. Who protects him? I asked. Who are these high-level connections? Raoul shook his head vigorously, wiping his brow again. To name names is suicide, senor. But watch the ones who benefit from instability. The hardliners who resist reform, who profit from the black market the embargo creates. Watch General Mateo Diaz, the name dripped with fear, head of state counterintelligence. They say Diaz and El Arquitecto are closely aligned. General Diaz, head of counterintelligence. That explained the protection, the access, the impunity. Thorne hadn't just found refuge, he'd allied himself with the most dangerous elements of the Cuban security state. 2 days later, I met Sophia again in the library archives. She looked paler, more strained than before. Without a word, she slid a thin file across the table. Inside were photocopies, grainy, smudged but legible. Shipping manifests from a state-controlled cement supplier. Geological surveys of the Cayo Libertad zone, showing anomalous subterranean voids, and requisitions for high-tensile steel, advanced ventilation systems, and most chillingly, specialized electronic hardware consistent with a modern command bunker or data center, all delivered to the Cayo Libertad remediation project over the past 18 months. Funded through opaque budget lines Raoul had mentioned, authorized by untraceable numeric codes. "This is all I could find," Sophia whispered, refusing to meet my eyes. "Do not ask for more. Do not come back here, Senor Miller. For your sake and mine." I nodded, pocketing the file. "Gracias, Sophia. You've been very helpful to my research." Walking back towards my Vedado apartment, through the bustling Havana streets, the pieces formed a grim mosaic. Thorne, El Arquitecto, allied with General Diaz, operating from a hidden underground bunker at Cayo Libertad, potentially using it to orchestrate his plot against U.S.-Cuban relations, all under the banner of the Ouroboros conspiracy that stretched back to Vance and Croft. The conspiracy wasn't just embedded within the elite. It had burrowed deep beneath the island itself. Finding the bunker was one thing. Getting inside, confronting Thorne, that was descending into the dragon's lair. And I had a feeling the architect had designed it with intruders like me specifically in mind. Chapter 4. The Cayo Libertad Peninsula jutted out west of Havana, a thumb of scrubland and rocky coastline pointing defiantly towards Florida. Once bristling with Soviet missiles aimed at the heart of America during the Cold War's iciest moments, it was now officially a decommissioned military zone undergoing environmental remediation. According to the intel from Fuentes' contacts and Sophia's archival digging, the remediation involved pouring thousands of tons of concrete and high-tech electronics underground. Thorne's bunker, El Arquitecto's lair. Getting close required patience and caution. The main access road was guarded, fenced clearly off-limits. I spent 2 days exploring the surrounding area in the battered Lada Miguel had procured for me, posing as Miller the academic, supposedly fascinated by coastal geology and Cold War relics. From windswept bluffs miles away, using high-powered image-stabilized binoculars, I could see the surface structures, crumbling concrete pads, rusting gantries, blocky administration buildings dating back decades. Nothing looked overtly active or threatening from a distance. But closer observation revealed discrepancies. New antenna arrays partially hidden by camouflage netting, regular patrols by unmarked jeeps carrying men who didn't look like environmental scientists, heat signatures picked up by a cheap thermal imager I'd acquired suggesting significant power generation inconsistent with a decommissioned site. The real defenses were subtle, likely electronic, and undoubtedly lethal. Direct observation wasn't getting me much more. I needed to get closer to the perimeter itself, probe for weaknesses, maybe find surveillance blind spots or infiltration routes beyond the main gate. Leaving the Lada hidden miles away, I spent a long hot afternoon hiking through the thorny scrub and dense coastal hammock that bordered the restricted zone's southern edge, moving slowly, staying low, scanning constantly. The official perimeter fence here was old, rusted in places, occasionally patched. Not a serious obstacle in itself. The real defense lay beyond it, open ground, likely monitored by sensors, cameras, maybe worse. I found a spot offering good concealment in a cluster of sea grape trees overlooking a dilapidated guard shack near a secondary disused gate. The shack looked empty, abandoned years ago. Perfect spot to set up for longer observation, maybe wait for nightfall. As I settled in, scanning the fence line, the guard shack, the heat-haze landscape beyond, something caught my eye. Not movement. Something out of place. Tied to a single strand of the rusted barbed wire on the fence, maybe 50 yards to my left, was a small knot. Not just any knot. A clove hitch, tied with faded blue paracord, secured with a specific double-locking tuck. My blood ran cold. It wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It was a marker. A specific signal Marcus Thorne had drilled into us during advanced fieldcraft training 15 years ago. A way to mark a cache site, a trail marker, or a message waypoint. Used only in specific circumstances, signifying direct personal communication between handler and agent, or between two highly trained operatives who shared the same obscure playbook. Tied here, on the perimeter of his suspected base, It could only mean one thing. Thorne knew I was here. He wasn't just waiting behind his defenses. He was reaching out, starting the game on his own terms. Fury warred with a grudging, sick sense of inevitability. This was classic Thorne. Arrogant, manipulative, turning even his own security into part of a psychological test for his errant protégé. I scanned the area around the knot with renewed intensity. Was it trapped? Was this leading me into an ambush? Thorne wouldn't make it easy. Following his old protocols, the knot itself wasn't the message, it was the pointer. It indicated a direction and distance to the actual cache or next signal. Using my compass, aligning the knot's orientation with specific landmarks Thorne always favored, highest natural point, most unusual geological feature, I calculated the vector. It pointed roughly north by northwest, deeper into the restricted zone, towards a distinctive rocky outcrop about 200 yards inside the fence. Getting there meant crossing that open monitored ground. Risky as hell. But ignoring the signal, trying to find my own way in while Thorne knew I was here and was actively playing games, that felt even riskier. He controlled the board right now. I had to play along, anticipate the traps, try to turn his own game against him. Waiting until the sun dipped low, casting long shadows, I moved. Cut the fence silently near the knot marker, slipped through, then moved in a low crawl across the open ground, using sparse patches of scrub and shallow depressions for cover, pausing frequently to scan for sensors or patrols. Reaching the rocky outcrop felt like crossing a minefield. Thorne wouldn't make the next clue obvious. I searched the base of the rocks, the crevices, the patches of dry grass. Nothing. Then I remembered another of his lessons. Always look where they expect you least, Kincaid. Especially up. I tilted my head back, scanning the weathered rock face above me. And there it was. Wedged into a narrow crack about 10 feet up, almost invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for, was a small, Tarn-X-cleaned, pre-1962 U.S. penny, head side out. Another signal from our shared past. Lincoln facing left, proceed west. If it had been facing right, proceed east. If it was the memorial side, abort, compromised. Simple, deniable, utterly Thorne. West. Towards what? Towards the main bunker complex. Or towards another test, another memory deliberately invoked. I pulled out my own map, cross-referenced the terrain. West from here led towards the crumbling remains of the old Soviet barracks and command center, further away from the suspected new bunker construction. A misdirection? Or was Thorne hiding something there? The psychological game was insidious. He was using our past, our training, against me. Every clue was a reminder of his influence, his control, his eventual betrayal. He wasn't just testing my skills. He was probing my resolve, trying to get inside my head, make me doubt myself, make me predictable. He wanted me to follow his breadcrumbs, react the way he expected me to react. Standing there in the fading Cuban light, the weight of Thorne's invisible presence pressing down, I felt a cold anger solidify within me. He thought this was still a training exercise, a contest between master and student. He thought he could control me, manipulate me back into the role of the predictable protégé. He was wrong. I wasn't that raw recruit anymore. Budapest, Costa Rica, Panama, Miami. The years, the betrayals, the violence had forged something harder, more cynical. Yes, I would follow his clue. I would play his game. But not by his rules. I would use the knowledge he gave me, the skills he taught me, to navigate his maze, anticipate his traps, and find the truth he was hiding. This wasn't about settling old scores, not entirely. This was about stopping whatever catastrophe El Arquitecto was planning under the Ouroboros banner. Thorne wanted a game. Fine. But he might find his former student had learned a few new, dangerous tricks of his own. I turned west, towards the ruins, towards the next move in a game where the stakes were far higher than Thorne probably imagined. Chapter 5. The western edge of the Cayo Libertad Peninsula felt like a graveyard of forgotten ambitions. Crumbling concrete barracks, their windows like vacant eyes staring out towards the Florida Straits, stood sentinel over weed-choked parade grounds. Skeletal remains of radar towers rusted silently under the relentless Cuban sun. Thorne's clue, the westward-facing penny, had led me here, to the heart of the derelict Soviet command center complex. It felt like walking into a meticulously set stage. Every instinct screamed trap. Thorne wouldn't lead me here without a reason, and his reasons were seldom benign. I moved slowly through the ruins, weapon ready but concealed, sticking to the shadows cast by collapsing walls, scanning the empty windows, listening for any sound beyond the skittering lizards and the sigh of the wind through broken rafters. Was the next clue hidden here? An ambush waiting? Or was the location itself the message, a reminder of past power, past conflicts the game's nations played? I checked the obvious spots first. Inside the shell of the main command bunker, shallow, stripped bare years ago, beneath loose flagstones, behind peeling propaganda posters depicting missiles and resolute soldiers. Nothing. Thorne's games were rarely obvious. He preferred subtlety, psychology. What memory, what lesson was tied to this specific place? We'd studied Soviet military installations during training, dissected their command structures, their vulnerabilities. Then I saw her. She wasn't hiding, exactly, but she materialized from the deep shadows inside one of the half-collapsed barracks buildings with a disconcerting lack of sound, like a heat shimmer resolving into human form. She stood near a crumbling concrete support pillar, watching me. She was Cuban, maybe early 30s, dressed in dusty but practical canvas trousers and a plain work shirt, her dark hair tied back severely. She wasn't military, didn't have the hard edges of the mercs I'd seen training near Santario Verde, but she wasn't a lost civilian either. There was an intensity in her dark eyes, a wary intelligence, a coiled stillness that spoke of discipline, perhaps desperation. She held no visible weapon, but her hands were empty, ready. I froze, half hidden behind a fallen concrete beam, raising my hand slightly in a non-threatening gesture, my other hand resting near the grip of my pistol. "Looking for artifacts?" I asked, using the David Miller academic persona, keeping my voice neutral. She didn't react to the alias, her gaze sharp, appraising. "There are dangerous artifacts here, senor," she replied, her Spanish precise, educated. "Some better left buried." She took a small step out of the shadows. "You are the one they call Kincaid, yes? The one El Arquitecto trained?" So much for Miller. She knew who I was. Which meant Thorne knew who I was, and likely knew I was here. This woman, was she part of the trap? Sent by Thorne? Who wants to know? "My name is Camilla Reyes," she said. "And I know Marcus Thorne. I worked with him. Helped him design certain systems for his new facility." Alarm bells screamed. She worked with Thorne? On the bunker? This had Thorne's manipulative fingerprints all over it. Sending someone he knew I couldn't possibly trust, offering, what? Systems? I asked cautiously. "You mean the bunker? The one built under the remediation project?" She nodded grimly. "The anthill, as he calls it. Communications, security grids, environmental controls. I was a systems engineer. Recruited from the university, under the guise of a state infrastructure project. Thorne. El Arquitecto. He can be very persuasive. He painted a picture of progress, of safeguarding Cuba's future with advanced technology." Her expression hardened. The reality, I discovered too late, was quite different. "And now?" I prompted. "Why talk to me? Are you his welcoming committee?" A flicker of anger crossed her face. "I am no longer associated with Marcus Thorne or his project," she stated firmly. "His vision is not progress, it is control, chaos. He manipulates everyone, the hardliners in our government, the fools in yours he feeds information to, the extremists he plans to arm." She gestured vaguely towards the east, towards the hidden bunker. What he is building in there, the operation he is planning, it must be stopped before he plunges us all into darkness. Stopping Thorne isn't easy, I said flatly. He doesn't leave loose ends. Why risk talking to me? He knows I'm here. Because Thorne, for all his brilliance, possesses a fatal flaw, arrogance, Camilla said, a shrewd light in her eyes. He underestimates those he believes he controls or has discarded. He likely sees you as a predictable variable, a former student to be tested, manipulated, perhaps eliminated once you've served your purpose in his game. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. He doesn't expect us to cooperate. He doesn't expect the engineer who designed his systems to ally herself with the operative he betrayed. My suspicion remained sky-high. This could easily be Thorne's play. Send in someone seemingly disillusioned, feed me partial truths mixed with lies, led me into a final fatal trap. After Varga, after my anonymous client, trusting anyone seemed like a fool's game, especially someone admitting direct ties to Thorne. How do I know this isn't just another layer of his game, Camilla? You feeding me what he wants me to hear? You don't, she admitted candidly. Just as I don't know if you are truly here to stop him, or if you have your own agenda, perhaps working for your own government, ready to exploit the situation. The stalemate hung between us, thick with unspoken history and mutual distrust. But look, she continued, pulling a small folded piece of paper from her pocket. This Thorne does not know I possess. A preliminary diagnostic report I ran on the bunker's internal network before I distanced myself. It shows vulnerabilities. Access points he believes are secure. She held out the paper. I hesitated. Taking it meant engaging, accepting her potential role, however risky. Refusing meant discarding potentially vital intel, relying solely on my own wits against Thorne's labyrinthine defenses and mind games. Thorne wanted me isolated, predictable, cooperating, even cautiously, with someone he likely underestimated or dismissed. That might be the unpredictable move. Why? I asked, still not taking the paper. Why risk helping me? What's in it for you? Atonement, perhaps, she said quietly, her gaze distant for a moment. And survival. If Thorne succeeds, people like me, people who know too much about his anthill, will be liabilities he cannot afford. Stopping him is my only way out. And right now, she met my eyes again. You, Kincaid, are the only viable instrument available to achieve that. Despite your past, despite my own involvement. I studied her face, searching for the lie, the tell. Found nothing but intelligence, desperation, and maybe, just maybe, a sliver of genuine conviction. It was still a massive gamble. She could be leading me into a kill zone, designed by Thorne himself. But the intel she offered, vulnerabilities in the bunker network, that was concrete, actionable. Slowly, I reached out and took the folded paper. All right, Camilla. Let's say I'm listening. Temporary alliance. Information sharing, strictly need to know. No blind trust. One wrong move, one hint of a double cross, and we're done. Clear. A flicker of relief, quickly masked, crossed her face. Clear, Kincaid. First, I said, pocketing the paper. This little game, Thorne started. The penny pointing west. Was that leading me to you? Or is there another clue here in these ruins? She shook her head. The penny. No, that is pure Thorne's psychological warfare. A reminder of his control, his knowledge of your training. Designed to make you second guess, maybe waste time searching here. The real target has always been the bunker itself. The paper I gave you, she tapped her pocket where I'd put it, contains access codes for a tertiary maintenance network. It's our best way in, if we move quickly before he changes the protocols. So the clue was a misdirection, meant to occupy me while he watched. And Camilla, she claimed to hold the key. Ally or enemy? The question still hung heavy in the air, unanswered. But now, holding the folded paper, the possibility of actually penetrating Thorne's fortress had materialized. A dangerous possibility, offered by a dangerous source. The game had just become infinitely more complex, and the path ahead towards Thorne's bunker was now shrouded in even deeper, more treacherous shadows. Chapter 6. Huddled in the thorny scrub just inside the Cayo Libertad fence line, the ruins of the Soviet barracks, faint silhouettes against the moonless sky behind us, Camilla unfolded the paper she'd given me. The red glow of her shielded penlight illuminated complex network diagrams and strings of alphanumeric code. This tertiary maintenance network bypasses most of the primary security protocols, she whispered, her voice tight with tension, her eyes scanning the darkness around us. It was designed for deep system diagnostics, emergency overrides. Thorne believes only he and his chief engineer hold the master access, but I embedded secondary backdoors during the initial system setup. Insurance. Insurance against what? Thorne, I asked, keeping my own voice low, studying the diagrams. They looked legitimate, complex. Against being trapped, she replied curtly. Or disposed of when my usefulness ended. Thorne collects secrets, Kincaid, but he doesn't like sharing them or leaving knowledgeable people unaccounted for. She pointed to a specific location on a rough hand-drawn map integrated with the network schematics. There. Access Junction 7 Charlie. Disguised as a standard environmental monitoring station near the old eastern seawall. It connects directly to the bunker's sub-level utility corridors. Convenient, I muttered. Too convenient. Still, it was the only lead I had that didn't involve charging the main gate. And patrols? Minimal near the seawall after midnight. They rely on seismic sensors and thermal imaging, focused further inland. The maintenance network access should, she stressed the word slightly, be shielded from the main security grid if we use these entry protocols precisely. We moved like ghosts through the overgrown landscape, navigating by compass and Camilla's memory. The sounds of the jungle replaced by the whisper of wind off the sea and the distant crash of waves against the rocky shore. The air grew cooler, damper. We found the environmental monitoring station easily enough. A small, weathered concrete plinth, topped with innocuous-looking sensors, identical to dozens scattered across decommissioned military sites worldwide. Camilla knelt beside it, running her fingers along the base until she found a near-invisible seam. Using a specialized magnetic key, she popped open a hidden panel, revealing a shielded keypad and data port. Her fingers flew across the keypad, entering the complex sequence from her notes. A low hum emanated from the plinth, and a section of the concrete beside it slid silently downwards, revealing a dark, narrow opening and steep metal rungs descending into blackness. Cold, stale air, smelling faintly of ozone and damp concrete, wafted up. After you, Camilla asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, unclipping a compact flashlight from my pack. I swung onto the rungs, descending into the earth, pistol held ready. Camilla followed, pulling the heavy concrete hatch closed above us with a soft thud that echoed ominously in the confined space. We were inside Thorne's world now. The maintenance tunnel was cramped, utilitarian, pipes, conduits, junction boxes lining the walls. We moved quickly, Camilla guiding us through the labyrinth, occasionally consulting her tablet, presumably monitoring network traffic, looking for signs of detection. The silence was absolute, broken only by our soft footsteps and the low hum of distant machinery. Twice we froze as heavy footsteps echoed from intersecting corridors above or below us, flattening ourselves into alcoves until they passed. The bunker felt alive, watchful. Camilla led us to another access panel, this one leading out of the utility network into what felt like a more finished section of the bunker. Polished concrete floors, recessed lighting strips, heavy blast doors spaced along the corridor. High-tech, sterile, functional. It felt less like a bunker, more like an underground corporate research facility. Or a prison. Where are we going? I whispered, acutely aware of the fisheye lens of a security camera sweeping the corridor ahead. Logistics and planning, Camilla breathed back. Sub-level 2. If Thorne is moving hardware or planning operations, the details might be there. Less secure than his personal command center on sub-level 4, but potentially accessible. She seemed to know the layout intimately. How much had she really distanced herself from Thorne? The question hammered relentlessly at my ingrained suspicion. We bypassed elevators, sticking to emergency stairwells, encountering no one. Reaching sub-level 2, Camilla used another code sequence on a keypad, opening a door marked Logistics Coordination. The room inside was dominated by workstations, large monitors displaying shipping routes and inventory lists, and corkboards covered in maps and coded notations. Empty now, but clearly a hub of recent activity. While Camilla moved immediately to a terminal, plugging in her decryption device again, I scanned the physical documents left out, printouts, notebooks, manifests. Most of it was disguised: mining equipment, water purification systems, generator parts, routed through front companies in Panama, Cyprus, Eastern Europe. Standard obfuscation. But one set of documents, tucked under a seemingly innocuous folder labeled Fente Fantasma, Proyección Final, caught my eye. Phantom Front. An obscure, ultra-nationalist Cuban exile group, known more for virulent rhetoric than actual capability. Why would Thorne be tracking them? I opened the folder. Inside weren't projections, they were manifests. Detailed lists of serious hardware: heat rockets, portable surface-to-air missile systems, encrypted communication gear, plastic explosives, advanced sniper rifles with thermal scopes. Far beyond anything a group like Fente Fantasma should possess. Attached was a maritime chart highlighting a specific rendezvous point in international waters just north of the Yucatan Channel, and a detailed timeline. Transfer date, less than 36 hours from now. Camilla, I said urgently, holding up the manifest. Look at this. She glanced over from the terminal she was working on, her eyes widening as she scanned the list of weaponry. Dios mío, she whispered. Fente Fantasma. They are lunatics, Castro-era dinosaurs dreaming of another bay of pigs. Arming them with this would ignite a firestorm, I finished. A direct attack on Cuba launched with advanced weaponry, looking like it originated from US-based exiles. It fits Thorne's destabilization playbook. Create chaos, force a US-Cuba confrontation, shatter the diplomatic progress. The Ouroboros plan, executed with Thorne's typical ruthless complexity. He's using them as pawns, Camilla breathed, scrolling rapidly through files she'd accessed on the terminal. Yes, here, encrypted communications between El Arquitecto and General Diaz, referencing the Fantasma project as Phase 1. And messages coordinating the arms shipment, a freighter called the Andromeda, leaving from a private dock near Mariel tonight, meeting a secondary vessel at the rendezvous point. We had it. The specific plan, the weapons, the timing, the delivery vessel. Concrete intel. We needed to get it out, expose it, stop that shipment. I pulled out my secure data drive, ready to copy the files Camilla had accessed. She nodded, initiating the transfer. The progress bar crawled across the screen. Suddenly, red lights flashed silently throughout the room. On Camilla's screen, multiple intrusion alerts flared. Compromised, she hissed, yanking her decryption device free. Someone detected the network breach. Or tripped a physical sensor. Heavy footsteps pounded in the corridor outside. Shouted commands echoed, closer now. The door to the Logistics Coordination Office slid shut with a heavy pneumatic hiss, followed by the unmistakable clang of magnetic locks engaging. Trapped. Deep inside Thorne's fortress, the alarm screaming silently through the network, armed men converging on our position, holding the fuse to an international incident in our hands. Camilla looked at me, fear warring with determination in her eyes. Our uneasy alliance, built on secrets and suspicion, was about to face its first and possibly final test. Chapter 7. The heavy thump-thump-thump vibrating through the magnetically locked office door was unmistakable. Not fists. Something heavier. A battering ram. Shaped charge preparation. Thorne's people weren't knocking politely. Red emergency lights pulsed rhythmically, casting the high-tech logistics coordination room in a hellish strobe effect, reflecting off Camilla's wide, seemingly panicked eyes. "They found us," she breathed, backing away from the door, fumbling with the data drive I just handed her to copy the arms transfer files onto her more advanced decryption tablet. "The network alert. It must have pinpointed our access." "Forget the copy," I snapped, grabbing my own secure drive, containing the only confirmed intel on the Andromeda shipment, and shoving it deep into an inner pocket. My eyes swept the room, searching for an escape route, any kind of leverage. Reinforced concrete walls, the now sealed heavy door, ceiling vents too small to crawl through. A couple of sturdy metal desks. Banks of computer equipment currently sparking and dying thanks to our earlier sabotage attempts on the terminals. Filing cabinets likely filled with more lies. No exit. A kill box. "There has to be another way out," Camilla insisted, her voice rising, bordering on hysteria. "A maintenance duct. Emergency override." "If there was, Thorne would have it guarded tighter than Castro's cigar box," I retorted, moving towards the side wall, pressing my ear against the cool concrete, listening for sounds from adjacent rooms or corridors. Nothing but the muffled thumping at the door and the rising whine of alarms. We were boxed in. Unless, I looked hard at Camilla, the seeds of suspicion sprouting fast in the fertile ground of adrenaline and past betrayals. This was the plan all along. You lead me in, use your backdoor codes, get me to the intel, and then the welcoming committee arrives. Her head snapped towards me, genuine-looking indignation flashing in her eyes. "Don't be absurd, Kincaid. Why would I help you find the arms transfer data if I was working for him?" "Maybe Thorne wanted the data found," I countered, thinking aloud, remembering Lars's poisonous suggestions in Panama. "Maybe he wanted it leaked, but blamed on me, the rogue American agent. Or maybe he just wanted me. And you, Camilla, were the bait." The thumping stopped, replaced by the high-pitched whine of a plasma cutter starting up outside the door. They weren't breaking it down, they were cutting their way in. We had minutes, maybe less. "That's insane," Camilla protested, but her eyes darted nervously towards the door, then back at me, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "We need to fight our way out when they breach." Against a heavily armed security team in a narrow corridor. "That's suicide," I stated flatly. I moved towards the largest metal desk, tipping it onto its side, creating a pitifully inadequate piece of cover facing the door. "Get behind this." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then seemed to make a decision, her earlier panic evaporating, replaced by a chillingly familiar calm I suddenly recognized. The same calm Marcus Thorne projected just before checkmate. "You're right, Kincaid," she said, her voice different now, smoother, devoid of fear. "Fighting them directly is suicide." She reached inside her practical work shirt, and her hand came out holding not her pistol, but a small, flat device that looked like a modified taser or stun gun. Which is why El Arquitecto prefers a more elegant solution. Before I could react, before the full implication of her words and the weapon hit me, she lunged. Not with the fury of a cornered ally, but with the precise, economical movement of a trained operative executing a pre-planned maneuver. I tried to bring my pistol up, but she was inside my guard, jamming the stun device hard against my side, just below the ribs where the bullet graze from Miami still ached. A massive jolt, far stronger than any standard police-issue taser, slammed through my body. My muscles locked instantly, spasming uncontrollably. My vision exploded in white-hot stars. The pistol clattered from my numb fingers. I collapsed like a ton of bricks, hitting the polished concrete floor hard, conscious but utterly paralyzed, every nerve screaming in agony. Through the haze of pain and flashing lights, I saw Camilla step back, calmly pocketing the stun device. She looked down at me, not with triumph, not with anger, but with a kind of detached, almost regretful professionalism. "He sends his regards, Jack," she said quietly, using my real name for the first time. "He really did admire your potential. Such a waste." The plasma cutter outside sliced through the last section of the door lock. With a screech of protesting metal, the heavy door was forced inwards. Figures in black tactical gear, armed with assault rifles, visors down, flooded into the room, fanning out, weapons sweeping the space. They saw me twitching uselessly on the floor, saw Camilla standing calmly beside me. One of the armored figures, clearly the team leader, looked at Camilla, then at me, then back at her. He gave a curt nod. "Status." His voice was electronically distorted. "Target secured, alive, as ordered," Camilla reported crisply, all traces of the disillusioned engineer gone. She was one of them. Or worse, she was Thorne's personal agent, playing a role crafted by the master manipulator himself. The codes, the infiltration route, the discovery of the arms data, all of it orchestrated. A game within a game, designed to lure me here, confirm the leak, and deliver me gift-wrapped to my former mentor. The ultimate psychological victory for Thorne. "Package is ready for transport to level 0, Camilla continued, gesturing towards me. "El Arquitecto is waiting." Rough hands grabbed me, hauling my unresponsive body up. My muscles still spasmed, refusing my commands. I felt a blindfold slipped over my eyes, my remaining weapons stripped away, my hands secured painfully behind my back. I was dragged out of the office, stumbling, helpless, hearing Camilla's calm voice giving orders to the tactical team behind me, securing the scene, probably erasing any trace of her cooperation with me. Betrayed. Again. Not by a desperate ally this time, but by a calculating enemy wearing a mask of camaraderie. Played like a pawn by the Grand Master himself, Marcus Thorne. As they dragged me through the cold, sterile corridors of the bunker, deeper into the earth, towards the level 0 where Thorne waited, the full weight of his manipulative genius and my own foolishness in daring to trust anyone connected to him crashed down on me. The game wasn't just psychological anymore. I was physically captured, disarmed, heading towards a face-to-face confrontation with the man who had shaped me, broken me, and now, it seemed, intended to finish the job. Chapter 8. The journey downwards was swift, brutal. Dragged through sterile corridors, the metallic tang of filtered air sharp in my nostrils, the low thrum of powerful machinery vibrating through the concrete floor. My body, still reeling from Camilla's high-voltage parting gift, felt like a useless sack of meat hauled by efficient automatons in black tactical gear. The blindfold robbed me of sight, but not sensation. The slight changes in air pressure, the hum of elevators descending, the disorienting turns. Level 0 sounded final. Finally, the movement stopped. A heavy door hissed open. I was shoved forward, stumbling onto what felt like plush carpeting. Hands roughly pulled the blindfold away. Blinking against the sudden, soft, ambient light, I found myself standing in a space that defied my expectations of a bunker cell. It was large, elegantly furnished, more like the private study of a wealthy, obsessive academic than a prison. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound volumes, philosophy, history, military strategy, physics. Another wall held a bank of state-of-the-art monitors displaying complex data streams, satellite imagery, news feeds from around the globe. A large mahogany desk stood near a viewport of reinforced glass that looked out onto nothing, just the raw, excavated rock face of the bunker's outer shell, dramatically lit. And sitting behind the desk, nursing a crystal tumbler half filled with amber liquid, was Marcus Thorne. 15 years hadn't softened him. He was older, of course, leaner, his dark hair now heavily streaked with gray, but the eyes were the same, piercingly intelligent, unsettlingly calm, missing nothing. The faint scar near his left temple, souvenir of an old operation in Beirut we'd barely survived, seemed more pronounced. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored gray tunic, radiating an aura of absolute control, of quiet, unshakable confidence. Beside him stood Camilla Reyes, her expression carefully neutral as she met my gaze briefly before looking away. "Report," Thorne said, his voice unchanged, that same smooth, persuasive baritone I remembered from countless training sessions and late-night debriefs. "Subject secured, Arquitecto," Camilla replied formally. "He penetrated sub-level 2, accessed logistics coordination. Attempted data exfiltration, neutralized during breach containment." She placed my secure data drive, the one with the Serpiente Emplumata plans, on the desk beside Thorne's glass. "Excellent work, Camilla," Thorne said, his eyes still fixed on me. "Your loyalty is noted and will be rewarded. You may leave us." She nodded once, gave me one last unreadable glance, and exited silently, the heavy door hissing shut behind her, leaving me alone with my ghost. Thorne gestured towards a leather armchair opposite his desk. My guards, still flanking me, remained impassive. "Sit, Jack," Thorne invited, as if we were resuming a long-interrupted tutorial. "You look taxed. The years haven't been entirely kind, have they?" My muscles still felt shaky, unreliable from the stun charge, but I refused to show weakness. I ignored the chair, remained standing. "You look pretty comfortable for a dead man, Marcus." He chuckled softly, swirling the liquid in his glass. "Probably expensive single malt." Thorne always had expensive tastes. Reports of my demise were, as they say, greatly exaggerated. Or perhaps, conveniently accepted by those who found my methods inconvenient. Retirement offers certain freedoms, wouldn't you agree? "Depends what you retire into," I shot back, nodding towards the monitors displaying global data feeds. "Looks like you just traded one set of masters for another. Ouroboros, isn't it?" I watched for his reaction to the name. Barely a flicker. "An organization with a more pragmatic view of global stability than the crumbling nation-states you still cling to," he replied smoothly. "A necessary evolution. Someone has to manage the chaos, Jack. Someone has to architect the future, prevent the inevitable descent into barbarism driven by petty nationalism and competing ideologies. By arming extremist lunatics like the Fente Fantasma? By triggering a war between the US and Cuba." I scoffed, anger simmering beneath my forced calm. "That's your grand vision? More chaos, more blood." "Chaos is merely a tool," Thorne explained patiently, like instructing a slow student. "A catalyst. Sometimes, corrupt or stagnant structures must be swept away to allow for new growth. Sacrifices," his eyes held mine, a subtle reference to Budapest hanging between us, "are necessary for the greater good. You, of all people, should understand that. There was no greater good in Budapest, Marcus. Only your ambition. You sacrificed good agents, sacrificed me, to cover your tracks." "Budapest was a lesson," Thorne corrected softly. "A demonstration that sentiment, loyalty to individuals over the objective, is a fatal flaw. You were compromised by emotion, Jack. Predictable. I merely facilitated the inevitable outcome and salvaged the larger operation. It made you harder, didn't it? Better." The sheer arrogance, the utter lack of remorse choked me. "It made me see you for what you are," I spat. "A user. A manipulator who sees people as pawns." "And are we not all pawns in larger games?" Thorne countered, taking a sip of his drink. "Governments, corporations, ideologies, they all use us, Jack. Ouroboros simply acknowledges this reality and seeks to manage the game more effectively for the long-term stability of the system itself. A guiding hand, ensuring balance." He leaned forward slightly. "You could be part of that, Jack. Your skills, honed first by me, then sharpened by years in the wilderness, they are considerable. Wasted on petty jobs, chasing shadows for fleeting clients. Here, you could have purpose again. Real purpose. Shaping events, not just reacting to them." The offer hung there, seductive and poisonous. Join him. Join the conspiracy. He was trying to recruit me, even now, appealing to the cynicism he himself had cultivated in me. Purpose? I laughed, a harsh grating sound. Your purpose involves trafficking children through Miami nightclubs, Marcus. Your purpose involves arming fanatics to start wars. Your purpose is built on misery and death, wrapped up in some twisted pseudo-philosophical bullshit about balance. Thorne sighed, a flicker of genuine disappointment crossing his features. Still blinded by sentimentality. Still focused on the individual trees instead of the health of the forest. Pity. He picked up my data drive from the desk, turning it over in his fingers. Camilla informs me you disrupted the Phantasma shipment communication protocols. Annoying. A temporary setback, easily rectified through alternate channels. But your possession of this data, he tapped the drive, is problematic. He looked at me, his expression hardening, the mask of the reasonable intellectual falling away, revealing the predator beneath. I had hoped this reunion might be productive, that you might finally see the logic of my position. But clearly, your loyalties remain misplaced. My loyalty is to not letting bastards like you burn the world down for profit or ideology, I growled, bracing myself. Thorne nodded slowly. So be it. He pressed a hidden button on his desk console. A final lesson then, Jack. About the consequences of misplaced loyalty and the inevitability of control. The heavy study door hissed open again, and two of the black-clad guards stepped inside, their weapons held ready. Thorne stood up, placing the data drive carefully in his pocket. Take Mr. Kincaid to secure holding. Level 0 Alpha. Ensure he is comfortable. We have much more to discuss later. And he may yet prove useful, one way or another. The guards moved towards me. I didn't resist. Physically, I was still depleted. Mentally, the confrontation had drained me. But as they hauled me out of Thorne's sanctum, back into the cold reality of the bunker corridors, one thought burned clear. Thorne believed he had won, believed he still controlled the game. His arrogance, as Camilla had pointed out, might just be his only weakness. And my only hope. The face-to-face was over. The real battle for survival, and maybe for stopping Thorne, was about to begin. Chapter 9. Level 0 Alpha wasn't a dungeon, not in the classical sense. Thorne wouldn't be so crude. It was a sterile, windowless box, carved deep into the bedrock beneath Cayo Libertad. Featureless gray walls, seamless floor, a low cot bolted to the wall, a simple toilet sink unit in the corner. No sharp edges, no obvious weaknesses. The air hummed faintly with the bunker's life support. A single camera lens, dark and unblinking, was embedded high in one corner. The heavy steel door was solid, electronically locked, with only a small, reinforced slot near the bottom for food trays. Designed for psychological isolation, sensory deprivation, breaking a prisoner down through sheer monotonous control. Classic Thorne. He likely assumed I was broken already, reeling from Camilla's betrayal, overwhelmed by his philosophical justifications back in the study. He probably pictured me pacing, raging, succumbing to despair. Thorne always believed he understood his students completely, anticipated their reactions. That arrogance, that utter certainty in his own manipulative genius, that was his mistake. He taught me too well how to observe, how to find the cracks in any system, physical or psychological. Lying on the thin mattress, feigning exhaustion or despair whenever I sensed the camera's focus linger, I analyzed the routine. Food trays arrived precisely every 8 hours, slid through the slot by guards who never spoke, never opened the main door unless ordered. Guard patrols passed outside the door at irregular but patterned intervals. Thorne liked controlled randomness. The camera in the corner likely had a blind spot directly beneath it, though getting there unnoticed was the trick. Thorne, in his hubris, probably assumed I had nothing to work with. But even sterile boxes contain potential tools for the desperate. The thin metal frame of the cot, bolted down, but perhaps the bolts could be worked loose over time. The simple plastic spoon left with the bland food trays, flimsy, but maybe it could be sharpened. The wiring conduit for the single light fixture, recessed, but maybe accessible. He'd also made another error born of that same arrogance, underestimating the power of his own lessons. He trained me to find patterns, exploit routines. The food delivery. Precisely on schedule. The guards changed shifts shortly after. During that brief handover, protocols might be slightly relaxed, attention divided. And the camera, its sweep pattern was predictable, lingering slightly longer on the door immediately after the food slot closed. Thorne likely reviewed the logs later, enjoying the perceived futility of my confinement, but real-time monitoring during shift change might be less intense. It took 2 days. 2 days of forced calm, eating the bland food, appearing dormant while secretly working. Using the edge of the metal food tray itself, laboriously scraping and sharpening the handle of the plastic spoon against the concrete floor under the cot, shielded from the camera's main view. It was slow, painstaking work, resulting in a crude but pointed plastic shank. Not much, but better than nothing. Then, the bolts on the cot frame. One was slightly looser than the others. Using the sharpened spoon handle as a makeshift lever, applying steady, painful pressure whenever I thought the camera wasn't directly focused, I worked on it during the night cycle when the main light dimmed. Millimeter by painful millimeter, hour after hour, the bolt began to turn. Finally, just before the next dawn light cycle, it came free. A short, heavy piece of metal. Another potential tool or weapon. The next food delivery was my window. As the tray slid through the slot, I was ready. Crouched below the camera's blind spot, I used the loosened cot bolt, wedging it into the slot mechanism just as the outer door closed, preventing the inner security latch from fully engaging. A tiny gap, maybe a 1/4 inch, remained. Not enough to see through, but perhaps enough to manipulate the electronic lock's internal wiring if I could reach it. This was the biggest gamble. Thorne's security systems were state-of-the-art. But sometimes the simplest bypass worked best, especially on internal doors not expected to face sophisticated attacks. Using the sharpened spoon handle, probing carefully through the slight gap, I felt for the lock's wiring harness based on standard installation protocols Thorne himself had taught. Found it. Scraped frantically at the insulation, trying to short the connection, praying for a malfunction, a temporary overload. Sparks flared faintly inside the mechanism. The electronic lock clicked, then went dead, disengaged by the short circuit, just as I heard the approaching footsteps of the next guard patrol in the corridor. No time to think. I slammed my shoulder against the heavy steel door. It swung inwards. 2 guards, mid-conversation, looked up in stunned surprise as I burst out of the cell, plastic shank held low. I went for the first one, driving the sharpened plastic hard into the soft spot just under his jaw before he could even raise his weapon. He gargled, collapsing backwards. The second guard fumbled with his sidearm, startled. I didn't give him the chance, using the element of surprise, tackling him hard, driving him into the corridor wall. We went down in a heap. He was bigger, stronger, but I had desperation on my side. I jammed the cot bolt repeatedly against his temple until he went limp. 2 guards down, silently. But how long until they were missed? I stripped one of the key cards, grabbed his sidearm, a standard Cuban military Makarov, better than my shank, and ran, not towards the main elevators Thorne would expect, but towards the nearest emergency stairwell. Upwards. Towards the surface. Sticking to secondary corridors where possible, checking corners, listening. The bunker was eerily quiet on these lower levels, mostly automated systems humming away. I needed information. The arms transfer. Was it still on? When? Where? Luck, or maybe Thorne's lingering overconfidence in his system's integrity, provided a chance. On sub-level 1, I found a small security monitoring station, momentarily vacant. The guard had presumably stepped away for coffee or a smoke break, leaving a terminal logged in, displaying rotating camera feeds from the upper levels and perimeter. A fatal lapse in discipline Thorne would have flayed him for. Ignoring the cameras, I jumped onto the keyboard, frantically searching accessible network directories. No access to logistics or command files from this low-level terminal. But maybe system alerts? Internal memos? I searched for keywords: Andromeda, Fente Fantasma, Rendezvous, Transfer. A hit. A low-priority alert regarding updated routing instructions for supply vessel Andromeda. Not the full plan, not the manifest Thorne had taken, but a string of encrypted coordinates, different from the ones Camilla and I saw earlier, and a revised ETA for the rendezvous point. 18 hours. Less than a day. The shipment was still on, route possibly adjusted after the disruption I caused. I tried to access the decryption key for the coordinates. Access denied. Damn it. I memorized the encrypted string, the new ETA. Partial intel. Better than nothing, but not enough to pinpoint the exact location in the vastness of the sea. A chime sounded, the guard returning. I wiped my presence from the terminal logs as best I could and melted back into the stairwell just as heavy footsteps approached the monitoring station. Too close. I kept climbing, heading for the surface for the maintenance tunnel access point Camilla had used. Reaching it, finding the access panel, using the dead guard's keycard, relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. I scrambled up the rungs, pushed open the heavy concrete lid disguised as an environmental monitor, and crawled out into the blessed cool of the Cuban night. I was out. Free from the bunker, free from Thorne's immediate grasp. I leaned against the cool concrete plinth, gasping for air, the stars brilliant overhead after the sterile confinement below. But freedom was fleeting. I was injured, weaponless, except for the confiscated Makarov, deep inside hostile territory. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that Marcus Thorne knew I was out. The game wasn't over. It had just escalated. And the clock on the Andromeda shipment was ticking faster than ever, with only fragments of intel to guide me towards stopping it. Chapter 10. Crawling out of Thorne's bunker, back into the humid Cuban night felt like being reborn into a fresh hell. Freedom was relative when you were miles inside a restricted military zone, bleeding from minor cuts, and the reopened wound on your arm, every muscle screaming from the stun charge and the subsequent escape, carrying only a dead guard's inadequate Makarov pistol, and 18 hours' worth of partial encrypted intel about an arms shipment that could ignite a war. Marcus Thorne knew I was out. His security forces, likely supplemented by General Diaz's state apparatus, would be turning Cayo Libertad inside out. Staying put was death. Moving was only slightly better. First priority, distance. I pushed myself away from the bunker's hidden access point, stumbling through the darkness, heading generally east, back towards the coast but avoiding the main roads. Pain was a constant companion, a dull throb underlying the sharper stab in my arm and the fire in my lungs. I ripped strips off my already tattered shirt to crudely bandage the worst of the bleeding, needing to conserve strength, needing to stay conscious. Dawn found me miles away, hidden in a mangrove swamp bordering a small, nameless fishing village. The Lada I'd left was an impossible distance away, likely discovered by now anyway. I needed transport, badly. And information. Was the Andromeda leaving from Havana harbor? Or Mariel? The deep-water port further west that Camilla's discovered manifests seemed to favor for discreet cargo. The encrypted coordinates in my head were useless without Sully and serious decryption gear. The only actionable intel was the ship's name and the 18-hour window rapidly shrinking. I had to assume Mariel was the likely departure point. Better facilities for handling heavy cargo, less tourist traffic than Havana. My luck held barely. An old man preparing his even older wooden fishing boat for the day's work didn't ask questions when I appeared out of the mangroves, looking like something that had wrestled a gator and lost, offering him a soggy handful of US dollars, emergency cash I kept secreted away, for passage east along the coast towards Mariel. He just grunted, his weathered face impassive, and gestured me aboard. Maybe he was used to desperate men appearing out of the swamps. Or maybe the dollars were explanation enough. The chugging journey along the coast was agonizingly slow, punctuated by the throb of the ancient engine and the throbbing in my arm. I huddled under a tarp, trying to stay out of sight, forcing myself to stay awake, watching the coastline drift past, remote beaches, military watchtowers, occasional glimpses of roads. I risked using the burner phone Miguel had provided back in Havana, hoping Fuente's network was still active and hadn't been compromised by Thorne. Andromeda. Mariel. Status. Departure ETA. Urgent. Sending the coded message felt like tossing a bottle into a vast, indifferent ocean. Hours crawled by. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly. My injuries ached, dehydration setting in. Just as I was starting to think the network was dark, or that I was truly alone in this, the phone vibrated. A single terse reply. Andromeda Berth Pier 4, Sector Sierra, Mariel. Loading completed, pre-dawn. Port Authority clearance, filed 0600. Departure scheduled 1600 local. 1600 hours. 4 p.m. Looking at my watch, factoring in the slow boat journey. I had maybe 6 hours left. 6 hours to get to Mariel, locate Pier 4, figure out a way past port security and Thorne's private army, and stop a freighter from sailing with a belly full of advanced weaponry destined for extremist fanatics. Impossible odds suddenly felt optimistic. We reached the outskirts of the Mariel port complex around noon. The old fisherman dropped me near a derelict quay piled high with rusting scrap metal, accepting the rest of my cash without a word, already turning his boat back towards less complicated waters. The port of Mariel sprawled before me, a vast industrial landscape of cranes, container stacks, warehouses, and docks humming with activity, guarded by fences and uniformed Port Authority police, undoubtedly supplemented by Thorne's less visible, more lethal security. Getting inside Sector Sierra, finding Pier 4, locating the Andromeda, that required recon. I spent the next 2 hours working my way closer, using the cover of stacked containers, dodging trucks and work crews, observing guard patrols, looking for routines, weaknesses. My body screamed in protest, but the urgency, the ticking clock pushed me forward. Finally, from the roof of a dusty customs warehouse overlooking the harbor, I saw her. Pier 4. The Andromeda. A mid-sized freighter, rust-streaked but functional, riding high in the water, clean lines suggesting recent modifications for speed or stealth. No obvious signs of cargo loading now, just routine dockside activity. But the security presence was anything but routine. Men in the same unmarked khaki fatigues I'd seen at Santario Verde patrolled the pier, alert, watchful, carrying assault rifles openly. Others, pretending to be dock workers, lingered near the gangway, their eyes constantly scanning. Thorne wasn't taking any chances. 1600 hours. Less than 4 hours remaining. How could one injured man stop a freighter, guarded by a private army, from sailing? Direct assault was suicide. Sneaking aboard to sabotage the cargo seemed equally impossible given the security and the time frame. Alerting the Port Authority? Pointless. General Diaz's influence likely reached here. They'd stall, obstruct, maybe even arrest me. My eyes scanned the dockside. Fuel lines running towards the ship for final bunkering. Mooring lines thick as pythons holding the ship fast. Loading cranes now idle, but positioned near the ship's forward holds. Maybe I couldn't stop the cargo itself, not easily. But maybe I could stop the ship. Delay it. Cripple it dockside. Create enough chaos, enough fire, enough damage that sailing became impossible, forcing the authorities, maybe even competing factions within the Cuban government less enamored of Diaz and Thorne, to take notice. It was a desperate, ugly plan, relying on maximum disruption, maximum collateral damage. Set a fire near the fuel lines. Sabotage the primary mooring lines under strain. Use one of the dockside cranes to accidentally drop something heavy onto the deck or bridge. All carried immense risks, likely a one-way ticket. Checking my borrowed Makarov, 8 rounds left. No backup weapon, except the knife strapped to my ankle. No explosives. Just grit, desperation, and the rapidly dwindling time. I looked at the Andromeda, steam already beginning to plume from her funnel as engineers warmed the engines for departure. Looked at the guards patrolling the pier below. Looked at the fuel lines snaking towards the ship. 4 p.m. The deadline felt like a physical weight. Taking a deep breath, ignoring the screaming pain in my arm and ribs, I slipped down from the warehouse roof, heading towards the shadowed underside of Pier 4, towards the fuel lines, towards the fire. The race against time was over. The race to disrupt had begun. Chapter 11. The underside of Pier 4 was a dripping, shadowy maze of thick concrete pilings, rusting conduits, and the pervasive smell of creosote and decay. Above, the heavy thrum of the Andromeda's idling engines vibrated through the structure. Time, 15:40. 20 minutes until scheduled departure. Maybe less if they got spooked. I moved quickly, ignoring the fire in my arm and the deep ache in my ribs, scanning the complex network of pipes running along the pier towards the berthed freighter. Found it. The main fuel bunkering line, thick, greasy, probably pressurized even now for final top-offs. Nearby, massive mooring lines, easily as thick as my thigh, stretched taut from reinforced bollards, holding the ship fast against the tide. Cutting those lines under tension was impossible without heavy equipment. Setting them on fire, maybe. But the fuel line was the faster, dirtier option. A major leak, a potential fire hazard right next to the ship, that had to delay departure, had to trigger emergency protocols, draw official eyes Thorne couldn't easily deflect. I pulled out the heavy Makarov I'd taken off the bunker guard. Not ideal for puncturing a high-pressure fuel line, but it was all I had. Finding a spot offering some cover behind a concrete support, I took aim at a valve junction, hoping a lucky shot might rupture it or at least start a serious leak. Said a silent prayer to whatever deity watches over desperate fools, and squeezed the trigger. The Makarov bucked, the shot deafeningly loud under the pier. Instead of a clean puncture, the bullet ricocheted off the heavy metal valve casing with a high-pitched whine, sparking erratically. Not the result I wanted. But the noise, the spark, it was enough. Ali. Debajo del Mule. A shout from above. There. Under the pier. Figures appeared at the edge of the pier overhead, peering down into the shadows where I crouched. Flashlight beams stabbed downwards. A shotgun blast roared, buckshot peppering the concrete pillar beside me, stinging my cheek with fragments. They knew where I was. No time for the fuel line now. I scrambled back along the underside of the pier, heading towards the stern of the Andromeda, using the pilings for cover as more shots rained down, splashing into the oily water around me. They weren't trying to capture me. They were shooting to kill. Then the Andromeda's horn blasted, a deep gut-shaking sound that echoed across the harbor, followed by the groan of heavy winches and the churning of water near the stern as the screws began to turn. They were casting off. Leaving now, firefight or no firefight. Thorne wasn't letting a minor irritation like me delay his precious arms shipment. I had to get topside. Had to get on that ship, or at least stop it physically. I spotted a thick mooring line still attached to a bollard near the stern, angled tautly upwards towards the freighter's deck, as the ship began to inch away from the pier. A desperate, insane chance. Breaking cover, I sprinted towards the bollard, bullets kicking up splinters from the wooden pier decking around me. I leapt, grabbing the rough, greasy rope, hauling myself upwards, hand over hand, dangling precariously over the churning water between the moving ship and the pier. My wounded arms screamed in protest, muscles tearing, but adrenaline and sheer desperation kept me moving. Figures appeared on the Andromeda's railing above, aiming down. I swung my legs, trying to make myself a smaller target, firing the Makarov upwards blindly, forcing them to duck momentarily. Just as I reached the railing, ready to haul myself over, a familiar voice, cold and precise, cut through the chaos. "Impressive agility, Jack. Even when wounded, you always did have a certain tenacity." Marcus Thorne stood on the pier beside the now empty bollard, having arrived seemingly from nowhere amidst the firefight. He wasn't aiming a weapon. He simply watched me, a slight, almost curious smile on his face, flanked by two more serious-looking guards. Behind him, I saw the burning wreckage of a dockside fuel pump. My ricochet had found something flammable after all, adding another layer of chaos to the scene. "It's over, Thorne," I yelled, clinging to the railing as the gap between the ship and the pier widened. "This shipment isn't reaching anyone." "Optimism," Thorne observed calmly, raising his voice slightly to be heard over the ship's engines and the distant approaching sirens. "Another of your persistent flaws. Did you really think disrupting the communications was enough? That I wouldn't have contingencies? The transfer will proceed." He gestured slightly, and one of his guards raised a rifle, aiming carefully at my already precarious handhold on the railing. No time for talk. Using my last surge of strength, I kicked off from the ship's hull, swinging myself over the railing, landing hard on the steel deck. I rolled, coming up firing the Makarov towards Thorne and his men on the pier, forcing them back from the edge. The ship was moving faster now, the gap widening to 10-15 feet. Thorne didn't flinch from the shots hitting the concrete around him. He simply stepped forward again, his eyes locked on mine, that cold, analytical smile back in place. "You can't stop it, Jack. You're on board a ship controlled by my men, heading into international waters. You've lost." Maybe he was right. But I wasn't done yet. I scrambled towards the nearest deck hatch, hoping to get below, find the engine room, sabotage something vital before his onboard security hunted me down. Then Thorne did something unexpected. He wasn't carrying a gun, but he reached inside his jacket and pulled out a small, metallic object. Not a weapon. A detonator. "You failed to appreciate the final contingency, Jack," he called across the widening gap, his voice carrying clearly. "Insurance. Against interference. Against betrayal." He held up the detonator. "This vessel carries not only the merchandise for the Phantasmas, but also a significant decommissioning charge, linked to sensitive cargo elements below deck. Enough to ensure nothing falls into the wrong hands. Enough," his smile widened, "to create a truly spectacular incident if necessary." My blood ran cold. He'd rigged the ship to blow. Taking the arms, the crew, me, everyone with it if cornered. The ruthless bastard. "You're bluffing," I yelled back, pausing near the hatch. "Am I?" Thorne countered, his finger hovering over the button. "You forced my hand back at the bunker, Jack. You forced this messy, public departure. Perhaps a dramatic final act is precisely what the current narrative requires. A tragic maritime accident, regrettable but necessary. Was it a bluff? Or was he truly willing to sacrifice the ship, the cargo, his own men, just to deny his enemies, me, Lars's faction, maybe others, the prize? With Thorne, you could never be sure. His games always had layers. Before I could react further, one of Thorne's guards on the pier, perhaps seeing his boss threatened or just following orders, opened fire again. A bullet slammed into my leg, the impact dropping me to one knee on the deck, pain white-hot and blinding. Through a red haze, I saw Thorne hesitate, looking from the detonator to me, then back towards the approaching sirens, visible now as flashing lights cutting through the industrial haze near the port entrance. He made his decision. With a final, almost pitying look in my direction, He lowered the detonator slightly, not activating it not yet, and turned, walking swiftly towards a waiting vehicle obscured by smoke from the burning fuel pump. His guards laid down, suppressing fire towards the port entrance, covering his retreat. I tried to push myself up, tried to aim the Makarov, but my leg wouldn't hold. I watched, helpless, as Thorne disappeared into the chaos of the docks, leaving me bleeding on the deck of a moving freighter potentially rigged to explode, with his heavily armed crew now undoubtedly converging on my position. He hadn't killed me. He hadn't blown the ship. He'd left me wounded, trapped, facing impossible odds, perhaps considering that a more fitting, more ironic end for his former protégé. The crossfire was over for a moment. But the real explosion, literal or figurative, felt terrifyingly imminent. Chapter 12. Pain was a rising tide, threatening to pull me under. My leg was a useless agony below the knee where the bullet had hit, painting the steel deck sticky and dark. Thorne's men were fanning out, their boots pounding closer, drawn by the firefight and my exposed position near the hatch. The Andromeda shuddered beneath me, picking up speed, the lights of Mariel already beginning to recede into the humid darkness. And somewhere below deck, Thorne's final contingency, the decommissioning charge, might or might not be waiting for its cue. Trapped wasn't the word, this was endgame. Except Thorne made one mistake. He assumed leaving me alive, wounded, on a ship full of his men was a guaranteed victory, a final ironic lesson. He forgot another lesson he himself taught me. The desperate man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous variable of all. Ignoring the searing pain, I rolled, dragging my useless leg, pulling myself behind a thick ventilation housing, just as automatic fire stitched the deck where I'd been lying. They had me pinned. But they didn't know about Thorne's insurance. "He's still alive," one of the guards shouted in Russian. Thorne always preferred professionals who didn't gossip in languages his clients might understand. "Secure him for the Arquitect." Using the ventilation housing as cover, I risked a look. 3 of them, advancing cautiously, weapons ready. Below deck, the real prize, the missile components for the Phantasmas, was heading towards its rendezvous. Stopping Thorne was impossible now. Stopping the shipment, maybe not. If Thorne had truly rigged this ship, the detonation mechanism likely had failsafes, maybe tied into the ship's systems, preventing accidental triggering but allowing remote activation. Or maybe it could be triggered locally if certain conditions were met. A fire near the sensitive cargo. A catastrophic system failure? It was a long shot, based on nothing but Thorne's penchant for overly complex contingencies. I needed to get below deck. Needed to reach the engine room, or auxiliary steering, or the cargo hold itself. Create enough chaos, enough damage, to either physically stop the ship, trigger Thorne's own trap, or attract attention they couldn't ignore. The guards were closing in. No way past them. I looked around, frantically. Mooring ropes lay coiled nearby. A fire hose station, mounted on the bulkhead. An idea sparked, reckless and probably suicidal. I ripped the fire hose from its housing, twisted the heavy brass nozzle free. Bracing myself against the housing, I pointed the nozzle towards the advancing guards and spun the valve wide open. A high-pressure blast of seawater slammed into them, knocking one off his feet, sending the others staggering back, momentarily blinded and disoriented. It wouldn't stop them for long, but it bought me seconds. Ignoring the agony in my leg, I half-crawled, half-dragged myself towards the nearest companionway ladder leading below deck, disappearing down into the ship's humming bowels just as the guards recovered and opened fire again. Below deck was a maze of narrow corridors, pipes, and machinery. Alarms were likely sounding internally now. Crew members, alerted, would be converging. I moved by instinct, driven by pain and desperation, heading generally aft and down, towards the thrum of the main engines. Twice I encountered crewmen, engineers or deckhands, neutralizing them quickly, brutally, silently with the heavy brass nozzle used as a bludgeon. No time for finesse. Finally, The engine room. Hot, deafeningly loud, vibrating with the power of the massive diesels driving the freighter through the water. One engineer on duty, his back to me, watching gauges. I took him down hard from behind. Now what to break? Smashing gauges wouldn't stop the ship. I needed something fundamental. Fuel lines. Lubrication systems? The main shaft coupling? Spotting a heavy wrench left carelessly on a catwalk, I grabbed it. Went for the primary fuel injectors on the starboard engine, hammering at the hardened steel lines, ignoring the pain shooting up my arm with every blow. One fitting buckled, spraying hot diesel fuel. Another cracked. The engine stuttered, its rhythm faltering. Good enough. I turned to the port engine. That's when the lights flickered, alarms blared louder, and a synthesized voice echoed through the engine room. Alerta. Alerta. Señal de socorro externa activada. Curso desviado. Autorides navales aproximados. External distress signal activated. Course deviated. Naval authorities approaching. Sully. Somehow, maybe tracking my sat phone's brief connection, maybe monitoring shipping anomalies, maybe pure inspired guesswork based on my last message about Thorne, Sully had done it. He'd sent out the Mayday, likely spoofing it as coming from the Andromeda itself, reporting hazardous cargo, forcing the ship off course and drawing the cavalry. My sabotage might not have been necessary, but it certainly wouldn't hurt the narrative for the boarding party. Time to get out of the engine room before Thorne's remaining crew decided to trap me here. But where to go? Back on deck meant facing capture. Then I saw it. An emergency beacon, mounted near the engine room escape hatch, designed to float free and signal the ship's position if sunk. It wasn't ideal, but broadcasting my position after abandoning ship might be better than capture. Just as I reached for it, the engine room door burst open. Two of Thorne's khaki-clad mercs, weapons raised. I didn't hesitate, hurling the heavy wrench at the nearest one, diving for the escape hatch ladder as they opened fire. Bullets sparked off the metal grating around me. I scrambled up the ladder, slammed open the hatch, and found myself on a lower utility deck near the stern. More footsteps pounding down the corridor towards me. No way out except over the side. Painfully, dragging my leg, I crawled to the railing. Looked down at the dark, churning water of the ship's wake. Looked back at the approaching guards. Far off on the horizon, I could just make out the flashing blue lights of approaching vessels, Coast Guard cutters, maybe Navy. They were coming. With a final glance back towards Cuba, towards the place where Marcus Thorne had once again reshaped my life with betrayal and violence, I pulled the emergency beacon free, activated it, and threw myself over the railing into the cold, dark embrace of the Caribbean Sea. The rest was a blur. Cold, shock, the desperate fight to stay afloat despite the pain, the rhythmic flash of the beacon beside me. Then finally, the blinding beam of a searchlight, the blessed rumble of a powerful engine, hands hauling me aboard a U.S. Coast Guard cutter. Questions I couldn't answer, medical attention I desperately needed, sedation. When I woke up properly, it was days later, in a sterile room that wasn't quite a hospital, wasn't quite a brig. Sully appeared eventually, looking more tired than usual. "You caused quite the international incident, Jack," he said, handing me a cup of lukewarm coffee. Coast Guard boarded the Andromeda, found her crippled, cargo hold damaged from an internal explosion near the bow. My breaching charge back at the dock, apparently more effective than I thought. Crew surrendered without much fuss once Thorne was gone. They secured the missile components. Fente Fantasma is furious, screaming betrayal. General Diaz is denying everything, naturally. Thorne vanished again, clean as smoke. And me. Officially. You were never there. Unofficially, Sully sighed. Certain parties in Langley and State are very interested in your first-hand account of Thorne's operation and his Ouroboros connection. Saved your bacon regarding the Florida warrants for now. National security override. Doesn't mean they trust you. Weeks later, after debriefings I gave minimal cooperation to, and physical therapy that hurt like hell, Sully arranged my quiet release, dropping me back where it all began, the marina, the Sea Witch. Standing on her deck now, feeling the familiar gentle rock beneath my feet, watching the pelicans dive in the late afternoon light, felt surreal. The scars on my leg and arm were new additions to the collection. The emotional scars, the ones left by Thorne's chilling pronouncements, by Camilla's betrayal, by the ghosts encountered in Havana, those ran deeper. I'd stopped the arms shipment. I'd faced my mentor and survived, though he escaped. Unfinished business. Thorne's final words, his promise to meet again, echoed in the warm Florida air. He was still out there pulling strings for Ouroboros, architecting God knows what future horrors. The conspiracy Sully and I had glimpsed, Vance, Croft, the biotech, the symbol, remained largely hidden, its true scope unknown. The Sea Witch represented freedom, escape, the chance to just sail away. But looking out at the horizon, towards Cuba, towards Panama, towards the wider world where these shadows operated, I knew deep down that sailing away wasn't really an option anymore. Not until the Ouroboros serpent finished eating its own tail, or someone finally cut off its head. The unfinished business wasn't just Thorne's, it was mine too. And the tide, inevitably, was already turning, pulling me towards the next storm. Can I send you conscripted for free? Even more, in the Declassified series. Get the box set, or grab the action-packed next in series. Deep Dive. Deception Tide. Miami, Mirage. Border Wars. Course of Action. The Summit.